It's an international tourist place. Lots of people. There's not a plane coming down. You see? Boom!
Oh man! What the fuck's going on?
Wow!
Oh shit!
Wow! Do you see this aircraft? I've got it all.
Yo, what the fuck? Yo, that's terrorist shit, bro.
That is it. This is terrorist.
That's terrorist.
This is terrorist. Shoo! You saw that plane went in through?
What's this other jet doing?
What the hell is that?
Holy fuck!
Oh my god! Oh my god! Jesus fucking Christ! Chris, are you fucking...
Don't touch it.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh no! Did you see that?
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
Welcome, family, to another edition of Stranger Thinking Media. This is Yeshayahu, where we bring you the gospel of Yahusha HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, to address the problems of a modern world. And today's topic, 9/11, King of the South attacks King of the North, Operation Mayhem, Part 7. And this is for Ezra, chapter 11. Then I heard a voice saying to me, "Look in front of you and consider what you see." When I looked, I saw what seemed to be a lion roused from the forest, roaring, and I heard how it uttered a human voice to the eagle, and spoke, saying, "Listen, and I will speak to you. The Most High says to you, are you not the one that remains of the four beasts that I had made to reign in my world, so that the end of my times might come through them? You, the fourth that has come, have conquered all the beasts that have gone before, and you have held sway over the world with great terror and over all the earth with grievous oppression." I think everybody remembers where they were that day, September 11th, 2001. I remember being in a certain city. I won't say the name right now, but I just remember going to a job site, and one of the superintendents there was like just all up in arms, kind of excited. And he was like, "Hey, man, did you hear? Did you hear?" And I was like, "Hear what?" Because I was en route. I was in a hurry trying to get there to the job site. And he says, "Somebody flew a plane into the World Trade Center." Well, the odd part is, in that particular city, there's a very small municipal building downtown that's called the World Trade Center. And there's a small municipal airport nearby. And I thought to myself, wow, one of them young pilots didn't know what they were doing, crashed a Cessna Skyhawk into that little Trade Center building. And he said, no. He said, the World Trade Center. And so immediately my mind goes to New York, and I go, you're kidding. And I'm still thinking a Cessna, a little small Cessna Skyhawk 172 or something like that. He said, no, it was like a jet 737 or something like that, whatever. Anyway, I think everybody has a story, as to where they were when. And that I just remember that being a very somber day. It was like it's like a like a Sunday, like all the stores were closing down early. There were a lot of basically, safety precautions being issued across the area. And of course, let's not forget about the Pentagon. There was an attack on the Pentagon too that day. And of course, in this picture, I'm showing that one. A lot of people forget that one, but yeah, there's a lot of people perished in that. And it was just a sad day all around. But I look at everything and I try to put it in kind of a biblical perspective. Like everything that happens, especially if it's something big, my mind just goes straight to the Bible. Like what does this mean? This was a big deal. It really was, because it was going to have an effect on world affairs in a major way. So it can't be something, I'm not saying that the Bible will talk about it specifically, but there's symbolisms and symptoms and parallelisms that I could glean out of it. And so one of the things I thought about was Daniel chapter 11. And when they were talking about essentially it was everything in the Bible is from the perspective of Israel, essentially, so it's the history of Israel, if you will. And so what was going on with the kingdom, well, not kingdom, with Israel at the time of the rise of the world empires, At the time of the Greco-Macedonian Empire, I think some of you may know the story. Alexander the Greek, he conquers a good portion of the known world, and that included the Holy Land. And so he comes into the story because, in the book of the Maccabees, essentially, he comes into the story because of the effect that he has on the children of Israel. And in that particular moment, the children of Israel were scattered, but the children of Yehuda, what we colloquially call the Jews today, they're in the Promised Land. They'd come back from captivity, Babylonian and Persian captivities. Cyrus gave them the decree to go back, and they did. Only about, I think, 50,000 or so out of the whole crew, but it was enough to rebuild the walls, rebuild the temple, and all that stuff, and to start new. And essentially, they did prosper. And but then, they're caught in between a rock and a hard place. All these world empires are rising up, these Gentile empires. And this particular one, the Greco-Macedonian, when Alexander the Great, conquers, and he doesn't get to enjoy it. I think the term was he wept because there was no more worlds to conquer or something like that. But anyway, he died young. And I think at the age of 33, there's all sorts of stories on that one. But I think the official narrative is he died of Babylonian swamp fever, or whatever the heck that might be. But he bequeaths this empire to his 4 generals. And there are 2 generals of note, or 2 of the quadrants of note, so much so that the Bible mentions them as kings, the king of the north and the king of the south. Now, I'm not going to do a full expose on Daniel because there's a lot to unpack here, but one of the things I thought about when you go through the storyline, Daniel's so dead on and detailed about his prophecies. A lot of people have thought, well, this was all written after the fact, But there's other things in there that show kind of a cycle, like certain things happened then. That's why he calls them the king of the north, king of the south. And that king of the north and king of the south thing, yeah, there was that thing at that time. So the king of the north at that time. And remember, Daniel lived like 300, 300 years prior to, I think it was about 300 years prior to all this actually happening. So, but he's writing about the Greco-Macedonian Empire. Now remember, Daniel's still in the Babylonian Empire, pretty much, but he's writing about another beast, this 3rd beast, and it's broken up into 4 pieces, and I'm not going to go all into it, but he's very specific, and it all happens the way he writes it. But they focus on the king of the north and the king of the south. That would be 2 of the generals of the 4. They never really mention the other 2, but the scriptures are pretty clear. The scriptures call 2 of these kings. It never calls the other ones kings, because I guess they didn't meet the standard of being a king, the amount of control or whatever, I don't know. But 2 of these generals became known as kings. And one was called the king of the north, the other called king of the south. So, and there's a long storyline behind it. But the king of the north was essentially Seleucus, and it became known as the Seleucid Empire. And that empire included, and it would go back and forth. They'd be fighting each other, but Palestine would be like right in the middle of it. I mean, dead center. And it's like Yah, the Most High, put him in that position for a reason, and I could speculate on why, but they got front row seats to all the mayhem. And so the king of the north, Seleucid, and the king of the south was Ptolemy. And of course, there were more than one. There was Seleucid 1, Seleucid 2, Ptolemy 1, Ptolemy 2, Ptolemy 13, whatever, But basically, it's just a back and forth thing as that Greco-Macedonian Empire, goes through time, So it's back and forth power grab, power struggle. So one of the things it talks about is the king of the north attacking the king of the south. And that did happen. And we can go into that. I won't do it in this video, but the king of the north comes down, he attacks the king of the south, and, he has good success. And so I'll read here in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So in one sense, that's the king of the north being Seleucus and the Seleucid Empire. And, the Ptolemy in the south couldn't withstand them. And of course, they ran rampant right through the Holy Land, so they couldn't withstand them, couldn't stop them. And so they're kind of talking about that here. But there's also a future end times, because they mention it, that in the last days, whenever they get to that, they're talking, number one, they're talking after the Messiah. And there's a mention of the Messiah in this, in Daniel chapter 11 discourse. You just got to know how to pick it out. But anyways, so this king of the north comes down and attacks, and he has great success, and he's, he does what he wants. But then, and this did happen too at that time. Later on, the Ptolemaic, one of the, I can't remember which one, but he then attacks the king of the north. So the king of the south then goes up against the king of the north and does magnificently, right? And he, blah, blah, blah. He gains a lot of territory. He gets a lot of stuff back, robs the treasuries blind, brings back artifacts. There's a lot going on. But then you get to a certain place, and then they talk about in the latter days or in the last days. But now you're making some kind of a prophetic leap. But the players are kind of still there. They may have different names, but you have to understand, I don't want to get all into the spiritual aspects of it and the principalities, there are principalities involved. But those principalities are the same principalities that were there then that are there now. And just so you understand where I'm coming from, when Paul talks about we fight not against flesh and blood, but against wickedness in high places, against principalities, the rulers of the present darkness, and all that stuff. He's talking about spiritual forces and how they got there. Paul doesn't go into it. I got some other videos that kind of mention how they got there and who they are. But these things have been there from that time, really since the Tower of Babel to this time. And so they don't change that much. They're fighting amongst each other for power and control. We don't see it, but we experience it. And so there's a point where you have to start looking, if you know this thing is going to go down to the last days, and these prophecies about the king of the north and the king of the south, what you're going to try to figure out is in the last days, like today, who would be the king of the north? Who would be the king of the south? Well, if you follow it all the way through, it kind of changes hands, but the power is given by those principalities. So once Rome defeats Greece, now Rome becomes the king of the north. And of course, this prophecies in Daniel tell you what happens. I mean, it's really fascinating if you've never dove into Daniel. And trust me, if you're gonna get a world history book and you get to like the Greco-Macedonian Empire and you read through it and all the stuff that happens, that actually happened to me. I mean, I'll go into that another time, but I actually had a history book. I used to like to read history, but it was a Sabbath, so I was reading scripture. And it was totally by accident. And then I started reading. I said, wow, that sounds familiar. It sounds like what, and I mean it. It happened just like that. I started going from Daniel to my history book, back to Daniel, back to my history book. And I'm like, this guy Daniel, he's calling this like he's stopping short of just using names, you know. He's got this on point. So anyway, but if you want to push these prophecies further, because there's something in there that tells you it has to go further. It goes into the last days, times after Christ, after the Messiah, till his culmination, to his return. So who would the king of the south be, say, today? You know? And who would the king of the north be today? You know, these are the things you have to kind of start figuring out, because it's going to come back into play and is already in play. So I'm going to skip to the next slide here, because there's something I want to really pick out. So in Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, and remember in that previous slide we saw where the king of the north came against the king of the south and had success. But here we see, and I'll read, and at that time of the end shall the king of the south, whoever he is at that time, shall push at him, meaning the king of the north. So that means the king of the north was holding sway, meaning he had his yoke around everybody's neck. But at some point, the king of the south pushes back. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Now, this actually, there's like 3 places in history where this kind of really happened. I mean, and I'm talking after the Greco-Macedonian is long gone. I mean, we're moving into the medieval period now. But, you know, they had the Crusades. So the king of the north would have been the papacy. And they would run those crusades to the Holy Land and on down into, Egypt. But there was a back and forth struggle, and sometimes, the papacy would win, the Pope and his knights would win. Sometimes the caliphate, meaning the Muslims, would win. So there's different ways to look at the king of the north and the king of the south. You could say for a good portion of the time, the king of the north was the Roman Empire. I mean, once they dispelled the Seleucids and the other Greco-Macedonian states and overcame them, then Rome becomes the king of the north. But then the king of the north kind of changes, and Daniel goes through that also, because now he talks about a beast, and and then the book of Revelations talks about it too. But if you put the whole thing together, you'll see that the Roman Empire has a change, and at a certain point it becomes the Holy Roman Empire, and so scriptures, prophecies also account for that too. And so they have those crusades. And then it goes back and forth between the Muslim world, the Caliphate, and the Holy Roman Empire, and it's back and forth, the king of the north, the king of the south. But then at a certain point, the Ottoman Turks, Muslims, they actually conquer and take over. So you have the Ottoman Empire that was basically over North Africa, up into Palestine, up into Turkey, and out towards and Saudi Arabia and Babylon, or what we call Iraq. So you had the Ottoman Empire, a Muslim territory. So he becomes king of the South, right? So you can kind of look at it this way. At this point in time, I would suggest that the king of the South is not a country or an empire so much as it is the Islamic influence becomes the king of the South. And so, the Ottoman Turks, and again, it goes back and forth because what happens is the king of the North, if you remember World War I, the Turks were fighting against the Allies, the British. And, I can go into that. I kind of have a keen history about that stuff. I could talk all night about World War I and World War II. But the British win, right? And so Palestine changes hands because the British win. The British made a deal. And I'm not going to go into it because you can get in trouble now for just telling the truth will get you in trouble, But we do know this, that the Balfour Declaration was signed, and the land of Palestine was essentially ceded over to a specific family. And I won't go into that, maybe in another time. But the British had control. After World War I, they defeated the Ottoman Turks. So the Ottoman Empire was gone, and now the British become kind of the king of the North, if you will, because he comes in like a whirlwind. So you could look at that as being the fulfillment of this prophecy. And that would be a very solid take on it. And then, I don't know, I was just thinking, since we were heading to the anniversary of 9/11, I started thinking about it again. And so the Caliphate, or the Muslims, I'll call them the Muslims, they're no longer known as the Caliphate, but they still operate in a strangely kind of a unified manner. I mean, there's infighting, but, Islam is Islam, at the end of the day. And Iran and Saudi Arabia shook hands and made friends. And that's a big deal, by the way. And it was China that got them together. And I don't want to digress too much, but it's to China's benefit to make sure that everybody is strong, if you follow what I'm saying. But the United States has the opposite take on it. Like, for instance, Iran is now a nuclear power. Saudi Arabia is soon to be a nuclear power. And so I believe China is going to build their nuclear reactors. I mean, that's the last I had heard, but they're soon to be a nuclear power. And what's happening here is being brokered between Iran and Iraq. Because a nuclear Iran would be dangerous to a non-nuclear Saudi Arabia. Iran being Shiite and Saudi Arabia being Sunni. That's a big deal too, right? And so it's almost like, no, we want to even the scales out. Everybody, what do you call it? Mad, mutually assured destruction. If everybody's armed with nukes, then nobody's armed with nukes. Sort of, kind of. But the one thing China does know, and I'm bringing China into this because they're the kings of the East, I believe, is that, look at North Korea. What North Korea is like on the U.S.'s number one hit list, but the United States hasn't attacked them. And, that's because they have nuclear weapons. And I'm not saying that the U.S. would never attack them. I mean, under the right circumstances, I'm sure they would. We might lose a city or two, but if they felt it was worth it, I'm sure the military would engage. But they haven't so far. And so what the rest of the world sees is, hey, Saddam Hussein didn't have nuclear weapons. He's gone. Hey, Gaddafi didn't have nuclear weapons. He's gone. Hey, Kim Jong-un, he's got nuclear weapons. He's still here. Hint, hint, hint. So I think everybody's kind of in a rush now to get nukes. Iran was definitely in a rush to get nukes. So Saudi, I think this is just my guess. I think the deck is being evened out. Okay, Iran now has nukes. Now we got to get Saudi nukes so that they're not at a disadvantage. So it looks like everybody's just getting nuked up here. Like an old Western. Everybody's a gunslinger now. And that's going to bring about a big change in this world because people won't be so quick to invade and do things once everybody's armed with nukes. That's what I see. But getting back on track, the king of the South now still is Islam. You don't call it the caliphate anymore. Excuse me. It's not called a caliphate anymore, but it's still Islam. And so what I see is at a point, Islam pushing back. I mean, you're going to have a couple of really large Islamic nations with nuclear weapons. That's no joke. And so I think about 9/11 and where it says that the king of the South will push at him. There was that terrorism thing, the king of the South pushing at the king of the North. But then the king of the North will come against him like a whirlwind. And of course, I'm not going into that in this video. I'm going to do a part 2, and you know what that one's going to be. That's going to be the whirlwind video, and we all know what happened after 9/11. But even that kind of fulfills this prophecy. So, and maybe there's something down the road that really pulls it all together. But I think you can see the stage being set for all of this stuff here. I think we can see it. So it's, I think this video is going on a little longer than I planned, but I think I planned it to be like an 8-minute video, pushing half an hour now, or maybe more. But I think you get the idea of the king of the North, king of the South. But at some point, I'm going to go in depth into the king of the North and the Roman Empire. I think people are very confused about what the Roman Empire is. And it's pretty simple. I don't think anybody, if you really think about it, you'll know who the Roman Empire is, and you'll know who the king of the North is. But we're just at that point in time where I think it's important to start figuring this stuff out. So anyways, Daniel chapter 11, verse 44. So the king of the North had come down, right? And he came down like a whirlwind and took out the king of the South, did him in. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, the part that I find interesting is where it says, if we look at the king of the North, who he might be now, it should be kind of obvious. I would put it, if I had to paint it with a broad brush, I'd say, yeah, NATO, kind of, sort of. I mean, I can get into more detail, but let's say NATO's the king of the North. And it says, therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. Now let's backtrack. But tidings out of the east and out of the north. So out of the east, he hears something out of the east. It shall trouble him. Well, who's in the east that's being very troublesome right now to the king of the North? But then out of the north. So we're talking about the king of the North, but out of the north of the king of the North shall some more news comes that troubles him. And I find it interesting that Russia, which is north of the king of the North, sort of, kind of, is, and China, which is out of the east. So the king of the North is hearing tidings out of the east and out of the north. and it shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, I'm not saying that, okay, everything that's transpired over the last 20-ish years kind of fulfills this, but I can see the setup happening. And, you know, just keep that in mind. King of the North, Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is not this little empire that encircles the Mediterranean anymore. It is global. It's gone worldwide. And I think we can understand where I'm coming from with this, but understand these prophecies are just right now being set up to be fulfilled. If you're paying attention to how this is all, you know, going down. So anyway, I just want everybody to kind of think about it. And we'll just keep our eyes open. Stay vigilant. So farewell, everybody. I love you all so much. And thank you so much for continually supporting my content. If you did enjoy this video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And share this with your friends and family. I'm sure they find it interesting as well. I'm very excited to continue this journey with you. I thank you all for bringing certain stories to my attention and for continually keeping me updated with certain events around the world. I very much appreciate you all. Shout out to the channel members. May everybody have a beautiful and blessed day who's in the body of Messiah, Yahusha HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ of Nazareth. And I'll see you on the next video. Shalom.